And welcome to Blue Collar Breakdown, episode number 5. Today, we're going to talk about how the economy is rigged against you. You, the regular middle class or working poor person, in favor of the billionaires. I know this sounds like it's a left wing podcast, but it's not. It's just a libertarian podcast. And yes, the system, the economy is rigged for the billionaires. Now, that much being said, before I get into that, I have to, even though I appear like a left winger, I have to talk about my latest article published today at the Libertarian Institute. I hinted that it was coming last week, and today it got published. And the article was about, can we balance the budget by taxing billionaires? And of course, the answer is, well, maybe for a year or two. But then we'll have 10% unemployment and there'll be no more billionaires to tax and the deficit will go up all the higher. That's the essence of it. And the left wingers know that's the math. They know that's the math. Okay. And we're going to be talking a little bit about math today because the way the system is rigged is some Superman 3 level decimal place stuff that helps the billionaires and hurts regular working people. Okay. I'm just as one of the pieces I'm working for at the Libertarian Institute. I haven't even submitted it yet, but I am going to submit it over the next week or two. So, sometime in July or August, it will be published. I would expect. The topic is basically, where does the working man's, the median income working man's pay go? Where does it go? I mean, how much does the government take? And how much does it add on in the form of additional costs to a regular middle class person? Okay. And that's what we're going to start to discuss tonight. I'm not going to get to the end. There's a small chance I run a little bit longer than the half hour that I typically run, but I think I can keep it down to a half hour. Okay, let's start with the way government spends. And just think about a regular working person. You start to go to work, and guess what? You already owe $18,000, or well, for this year it's $15,000. Next year it'll be $18,000. Why? Because of the deficit that's being put on your family. Now, the median family income in 2025 is about $87,000. So that's the total family. It's household income. All right. So the median household income is about $87,000, according to the census from 2023, and then I added on some GDP growth, but because they don't have the 2024 numbers and 2025 numbers out, but it's about $87,000. So if you make more than $87,000, you're doing better than the majority of Americans if your family does, not just you individually. And if you make less than that, you're doing less. You're doing a little bit worse than the majority of families. So the median is not average. This is an important distinction here. Median is the middlest of the middle. If you take all the people and their incomes and you find the person who's in the middlest of the middle, that's it. Now, an average is a big difference, all right? Think about it from the perspective of, if you have 5 people in an economy and they all make $1,000 a year, well, the median and the average is the same. Everybody's $1,000, right? But what if one person goes up to $995,000? No, $996,000. So this is a $1 million economy total, right? Well, the average, $1 million divided by 5, the average is $200,000 a year, but the median is still 1,000 because you've got one guy that's really rich and 4 guys that are still making 1,000. That's the difference between median and mean or average. Mean and average are synonyms. Okay, so you start your work, and guess what? With inflation, you're already being taxed. You haven't even got your paycheck yet. You're already being taxed. Why? Inflation takes away the value of your paycheck before you even get it. All right. And a lot of people say, well, it's 4%, 3%, 4%, whatever it is. It's not that big. And if you look at it from the perspective of, most people, they don't have their whole annual salary in the form of cash. So it's not your whole annual salary. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit. But inflation is, and it's important to keep our definitions here. I'll make a few I'm not going to do too many definitions. I just want to set the ground straight here. Inflation is an increase in the money supply. And what it does is when you increase the amount of money in circulation, and in this case, I'm talking about actual cash, or some cases, electronic cash, like checking accounts and online accounts, things like that. When you increase the amount of cash, you decrease the value of that cash on a dollar basis. All right. And what that does is the people who are social creditors, who are just creditors, they lose value because I am expecting this dollar coming. And when it comes, it's going to be worth less. However, the beneficiaries are people who are debtors, because I owe this, and when I actually have to pay it, I'm going to have to pay less. And in the sense of the average working person who works for a salary or wages, they are social creditors, because every worker who starts work on Monday is going to wait till, there's a few day laborers, but most of them are going to have to wait at least until Friday, and usually a couple weeks. Sometimes people are paid bi-weekly or monthly, and you have to wait a full month. But you're going to have probably a couple of weeks where you have to wait for that pay. And while you're waiting, that pay is getting taxed by inflation. And when you get the pay, what do you do with it? You take it and put it in your checking account, or maybe it's automatically deposited into your checking account. And that also is still taxed by inflation. Or maybe you put it in a savings account or a Christmas fund or something. And all of that money. Now, generally speaking, if you look at the median worker, for the most part, we're talking about people who have 2 weeks of their wages waiting that are being taxed by inflation while they're waiting to get for payday, and maybe another month where they have it in cash, but they haven't spent it yet. They're saving up for their monthly mortgage. They've got it in a savings fund for Christmas or vacation. They probably have $3,000 or $4,000 at any particular time, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, in the various savings accounts that you have. The average person, a lot of people have a lot more than that. All right. But we're talking about the middle of the middle. They probably have $3,000 or $4,000. So, a couple of weeks pay, maybe actually probably more than 4,000. Now that I think about it, it would have to be more than that. 87,000 of, divided by 12 for a month's pay would be, well, you do the math, it's about 6,000. So, but the point here I'm getting here is that's what's being taxed. And you think about, okay, inflation is only 3%. Let's say you have $10,000 outstanding, between what you're waiting for, when you're waiting for your paycheck and when you have your paycheck and it's still in cash and you haven't spent it. $10,000 times 3% is only $300. It's not a huge tax. Hold on to that thought, okay? Because on the other end, there's these many millions of Americans who are wage earners. On the other end and I want to show you, a couple of things. First of all, here's a little infographic I created for the Libertarian Party of Massachusetts. Who wins and who loses with inflation? And you can see here, losers, laborers and people on fixed incomes, they lose because the value of their wages or their earnings goes down, and because of inflation. Renters. Every renter is a social creditor. Every renter, you go to the landlord and the first thing he says is, I want first, last, and security deposit. So you basically have 3 months rent, that you're always loaning on credit to the landlord before you even move into the house or apartment or whatever. So they're losers. Bank depositors are the very definition of creditors. You put your money, the bank owes you the money. They are debtors. Banking, by the way, is the very business of being in debt. So they are going to benefit from this. And of course, winners, people with real estate, mortgages, and hard assets. And let's put this, I talked about this in detail for an article I wrote for the Libertarian Institute last October. And I want to go into it in a little more detail. Here's a graph that, not a graph, it's a chart that I used in the article, and I've linked to it in the show notes. So if you want to click on it and go to the site and read the piece, you can do that. On a $1 million property with a 20% down payment, what's the property? Assuming you have it rented out at a regular basis, all things are the same. How much does a landlord gain in profit, one versus another? And basically what you do is, the purpose of having a rental property is you get the renter to pay off your mortgage and plus a little bit extra, a little bit of spending cash. And then you have an income. And then when you've paid it off, then you have all of the rent is yours to keep too. So after 30 years, or whatever the term of the loan is, you keep that going. And you can see here under no inflation, there's a small profit of, I just used a monthly rent figure here for a $1 million property of $4,000. In a lot of markets, it's going to be more than that, but just for demonstration purposes. And so your monthly rent 10 years down, if there's no inflation, it's still going to be $4,000. And the property value is going to be $1 million. And you're going to have equity. If you've paid a 30-year loan with a fixed rate, you're going to have additional capital gains because you're going to have paid off some of that loan. Not a lot of it, because most of the principal is paid off toward the end of the note. So you're going to have 17% equity in that property, $170,000. And so you add it up, and you've got a nice little tidy profit of 9.58% when you add in the rental profit, the rent profit plus the equity that you've gained in the thing. But now you do 2% inflation. We're a little bit more than 2% right now. You can see the profit rate doubles, or just about doubles, to 16%. Why? Because there's more equity, and the rent goes up as inflation goes up, because the rent is tied to the market, the demand for it. You might say, well, why is the landlord charging more? Because all of the people with new mortgages have to charge more anyway. So that's just the market. That's how it works. And of course, with 10% inflation, you've got someone who has a profit rate that doubles from there. And of course, we had close to 10% back in 2022. We had 8% CPI and price inflation. So this gives you an idea of how it works. And to give you an idea on a larger scale, say you have $1 billion. I created this during the Biden administration when inflation was 8%, but I took a 5% inflation rate because it was kind of an average of the Biden years at the time. And if you look in the bottom right-hand corner of the graph, I'm assuming here that you've got a billionaire. He's worth $1 billion. So he's got 20% equity in all his properties. He's purchased $5 billion worth of property. He owns 20% equity in them, but he also has $4 billion worth of mortgages, of debt. And what happens is, and the question is, well, where does this money go when the renter, the wage earner, is paying $300 a year? Well, you pool several 100,000 of them for this billionaire real estate developer, and it goes to him. And how does it go? Well, if you look at the graph, 5% inflation, it adds $200 million to the net worth of a real estate developer worth $1 billion, because he's got those what I described. And if you look, $4 billion with the value of the debt going down by 5%, that's $200 million. So it's a gift by the US Central Bank, by the Federal Reserve Bank, from wage earners, many wage earners, to one billionaire real estate developer. And the same thing works with other hard assets, hedge fund managers, and whatever. In fact, in many cases, the inflation acts as sort of a soft put. A put is like a way of getting out of a property that's going down. Is sort of a soft put, because property stock prices are always going to go up. Why they're always going to go up? Because the dollar is always going down. So the nominal dollar value is always going to go up. And so that's why we see record stock market prices, even though if you measure the stock market in terms of gold or silver, it's not especially high historically. Okay. The point here is the official narrative is that, gee, we need inflation. We just need inflation, because not a lot of inflation, just a little bit of inflation, because it's good for the economy. Inflation is good for the economy. That's what they tell you, because telling working people that we need you to take a 2% pay cut every year forever is not going to sell. So they say 2% is good for the economy. And you know what? It is good for the economy. It's good for the economy for the billionaires. It's not good for your economy. And if you look here, inflation inflation or deflation doesn't really help economic growth. In fact, if anything, inflation hurts economic growth. One of the charts from the piece that I had last year is this is a chart of U.S. economic growth by decade, and overlaid the amount of inflation or deflation during that entire decade. And you can see here, if you look on the very best decade was the 1940s ever. It had close to 50% real per capita GDP growth. So the average, per person, the average growth went up 50%, close to it. And it was an inflationary decade. But if you look, the next three best decades in American history for economic growth were all deflationary decades. And if you look at the other end of the chart, you can see, okay, the very worst was a deflationary decade, the 1810s, and it's because there was a huge panic or recession, depression for a year in 1819. So the economy tanked in the 18 teens. And if you look at economic historians, they will blame the Second Bank of the United States. But let's just say, if you look, the next three worst decades, the 1910s, which was the World War I decade, the 2000s, and 1860. Let's not count that one. But the next, because 1860s don't really. That's not really. That was the Civil War. Let's face it. There was some recovery there. But the next two worst were high inflation periods. They were inflationary decades. So if you look here, you don't see any sort of relationship between a deflation and a bad economy. In fact, one of the things that people like to say is, oh, remember the Great Depression? The Great Depression was deflationary. Actually, the Great Depression was inflationary. Yeah, every recession begins with a period of deflation, but that's a symptom, not a cause. The 1930s were an inflationary decade, and if you look, you see that right in the toward a higher end in the chart. All right, it was a deflationary decade, but it was a pretty high growth decade overall. If you look, it's about 2/3 of the way up. All right. Anyway, that much being said, there is a causal link between the let's see. I just wanted to point this out because I saw this the other day. This is on the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the stats came out on July 15th, so there's a couple of days ago. CPI for all items rose 0.3% in June. Okay, and then right underneath it, the very next story, real average hourly earnings for employees declined 1% in June, 0.01% in June, and that's natural because wages are sticky. If inflation goes up, wages are going to stay pretty much the same in most cases. And that's pretty much what happened. You know, if you look at wages in the early 2020s, what you see is wages, real wages after adjusting for inflation went down, and they really have yet to catch up to 2020, even today. So the impact on wages of inflation is a downward impact. And yet the Federal Reserve convinces us with billionaires logic, billionaire propaganda, we need some inflation for a good economy. But there's no data behind it. There is no data behind it. Likewise, and I don't want to go too long, but the next tax you pay as you pick up your paycheck, right? Because we started out, we were talking about inflation, and you're paying your taxes even before you get your paycheck, and then also after you get your paycheck. But when you pick up your paycheck, the biggest tax that comes out of your check for a median worker is the payroll tax. That's the FICA tax, the HI tax that supposedly pays for Social Security and Medicare. And what do the billionaires tell us? The people in Washington tell us this is the third rail of politics. This is a tax that starts out at 15.3% on the first dollar. There's no deductions on the first dollar earned for every wage earner. And then, of course, you add in the income tax as you go up. But 15.3%, which, by the way, is pretty close to the maximum. I think the maximum that a person pays in capital gains tax if you have profits from a stock market trade or a real estate transaction or any kind of property, they top out at 20%. So just the bottom wages. I showed this on the podcast last week. I'm going to show it one more time. This is a graph of tax rates on wage labor and tax rates on capital income. And if you look here, it's roughly double, and there's no economic reason for that. The billionaires always say, well, we have to, what's good for the economy is cutting capital gains. Well, that's because the billionaires fund the shows that are pushing this. That's all it is. There's no economic reason why labor should be taxed at double the capital rate. Now, if I were a socialist, I would say, well, what we've got to do is raise the capital gains tax, raise the tax on the rich. But as I showed you at the beginning of the podcast, that's just not possible. That's just not possible to raise the tax. What we should do is not to try to oppress the rich, but to stop oppressing the middle class and the poor. That's the libertarian message. Don't raise the tax on the rich. Stop oppressing the poor by lowering their taxes. But the propaganda is so strong. We need inflation for a good economy. We have to pay all these payroll taxes because even though Social Security started with just a 2% payroll tax, now it's 15.3% with Social Security and Medicare combined. And that's for your good. That's for your good. And you know what? It goes into a trust fund that it earns interest with T-bills. What it does is the trust fund buys treasury bills and it earns interest. What they don't tell you is the Federal Reserve which helps with all these trust funds, it has suppressed the interest rate. So the trust funds that are when there was surplus, they started buying these T-bills and the interest rate went down, 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 down. Now it's far less than the rate of inflation. So the Federal Reserve Bank is creating inflation and lowering the interest rate on the T-bills in the Social Security Trust Fund. They are robbing the trust fund by taking the value out of those dollars. It's over $1 trillion over the last 4 years, and it's going to continue, even with the interest rates gone up a little bit since then. Right now, the interest rates, the discount rate is about 5%, the federal funds rate. The rate that the Federal Reserve sets for interbank loans. So it's a little higher than inflation but for 20 years, 22 years, from 2000 to 2022, with a short period in between in 2006 as an exception, the interest rate was basically at zero, and in many cases after inflation, it was in a negative. It was really a negative interest rate, and it was great for a little while. But what happened? What happened was the value of assets went up. When you make credit cheap and basically allow people to forgive their loans, all the people with credit go out and get a bunch of credit and buy a bunch of stuff and wait for it to go up. And that's what happened with the real estate market. This is why real estate prices, in just the year 2000, okay, just not even going back to the 80s, just in the year 2000, the price of a home was 3 times the median income. All right, so think about it today. The median income today is about $87,000 for a household. So it was 3 times that. A house, the average house was $260,000. It would be $260,000 today. It's almost double that. All right, today it's 5.7 times the median income. And what you have here is what we have here is the billionaires selling the real estate lobby on, oh, it's good for you. That your house is an investment. Your house is going to get more valuable. And they sell this to the boomers who, hey, they're already in their house. They've already paid off their mortgage or whatever. They don't have to make payments. And what's happened is younger people are being priced out of homes as a result of the Federal Reserve's policies that have rigged the game against you, the median taxpayer. In fact, if you go back to the 1980s, the percentage of households headed by 25 to 34-year-olds, or maybe it was 26 to 35-year-olds, but that demographic of people who are basically out of college or in the workforce for a few years up until they hit about 35, more than half of them had homes, had purchased their own homes. Today, 37%. It's because the down payment's higher, and of course the interest rate is much higher. That makes the payment higher. See, one of the things that happens is when they suppress the interest rate, the real price for the most part with real estate isn't the sticker price. It's the sticker price times the interest rate. All right? Because most people, unless you're a big real estate developer, you don't purchase properties with cash. You purchase properties with a mortgage. So the determinant on whether or not you can purchase a house isn't the sticker price, it's the mortgage payment. So when the interest rates went down, it was great because people could afford homes. But what happened was it stimulated the sticker price going way up. And then after 22 years of super low interest rates, then the Federal Reserve says, oh, well, we got to fight inflation. So let's jack up the interest rate to 5.5%. So now mortgages are, you want to get a mortgage, it's about 7%. Whereas if you've got one in 2022, you could get one for 3%. I know a family member that got one for 2.5 with a veteran's loan. I mean, it makes the house much, much, much less affordable. And this is why the young people can't get a mortgage. And the problem, again, I want to stress here, the problem is not high interest rates. The problem is high sticker prices times a normal interest rate. What screwed the economy for young people, what rigged the economy against young people, isn't that they raised the interest rate to normal rates, but that they suppressed it for 20 years. And what they've got to do is keep the interest rate high so that the prices fall. That's what they should be doing, but they're not going to do it for a host of other reasons that I won't get into today, because I think I'm pretty close to 30 minutes here. But let's see if I got any live comments. No live comments. Okay. Or maybe they're just not showing up on my feed here. That's what I wanted to talk to you. But really, when you think about it, just the interest rate manipulation and inflation, just the interest rate manipulation alone on stock price, on house prices, has hurt the median income young family and cost them several $100,000 more than a family just one generation ago, because the sticker price is now 5.7 times the median income, whereas in 2000, it was 3 times the median income. This is how the economy is. This is only part of the way the economy is rigged against you. And we libertarians want to unrig it. We don't want to fight a class war. We just want the working person not to pay these oppressive taxes, as you can see on my chart here that I've left up way too long. And we want freedom. We want to lower the tax rates for everybody. But let's start with working people. Let's start with not keeping oppressive payroll taxes that it's not really going to Social Security, right? They spend it the instant they get it. And then they put it in a trust fund and they take it out of the trust fund with inflation. Like they lie to you at every level. And the billionaires are able to benefit from it. They win from inflation. And they win when the middle class is taxed into poverty because they don't have to pay for anything. What we need to do is we need to get rid of the taxes, lower the spending, start with freedom. Okay, one last note before I end the stream here. I have thrown my hat into the ring for there are actually 2 open spots in the Libertarian National Committee, 2 at-large spots, and I've thrown my hat in the ring. I want on the Libertarian National Committee. I think I can bring a working man's perspective and a little economy to the LNC. And I'm happy to say my friend Scott Horton has endorsed me, which is great. I think I could serve as I've served my state party. And I look forward to doing just that. Okay, now I'm going to torment you with my outro. This time I didn't do a rock one. I did a country one, but it's inflation based. And of course, I'm tormenting you because I want you to help contribute to support the podcast so I can do more of these, so I can have more time to do these. So here we go. Thank you for listening, and keep listening, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
Get yourself the facts. Inflation is a transfer tax from the poor to the rich, and it's time for a switch. Bankers using the Superman 3 scam, bilking the poor man with inflation. You know it's true without a diagram. Help fight back and recover the nation. Buy me a coffee, help with the program, and get yourself the facts. Inflation is a transfer tax from the poor to the rich, and it's time for a switch. Billions to the fat cats, making the poor man's wages smaller. Under both Republicans and Democrats, it's time for decent people to holler. So get yourself the facts. Inflation is a transfer tax from the poor to the rich.